Hello and welcome to Digital Circus. I'm your host Tyler Hodgkinson, and on this special installment we're going to be discussing ethics within video game coverage. It's an ongoing debate and one that deserves to be examined. As a fan and working journalist, I've experienced both sides of the spectrum. There's certain practices I don't believe news writers should partake in, and moments where some casual gamers only offer uneducated perspectives. With that said, my hope is that this episode delivers clarity regarding issues that may or may not be present in video game coverage. But let's start at the beginning. Where do young journalists learn about ethics? I spoke with Brian Legree, Program Director of Durham College's Journalism Program, to discuss what they teach those stepping into the industry. So with the idea of fake news infiltrating all types of media, how much emphasis do you put on ethics and getting the story right?
I think you'd find, Tyler, that any student who's gone through our program understands the phrase, get it right before you publish. Do not rush to hit the send button or the upload button. We're not in a rush to get it there first, but we do want to get it there completely 100% accurate. So that is our goal every time. It's part of the learning curve, and we want to ensure that our students understand that, so we're constantly reinforcing that message.
Right. With your students, how do you approach the subject of biases?
My message to the students is fairly simple in terms of reporter bias, because let's face it, people do have their own opinions on things. But for my money, if a reporter can produce a report, be it on broadcast, in print, online, and the reader, viewer, listener, if it's on radio, has no idea what the reporter's stance or position is on that particular issue, then the reporter is doing a good job, provided again that everything is balanced and fair and accurate. So the consumer of the news should have no idea what the reporter's position on that news is.
So with social media, everybody seems to think they're a quote-unquote journalist. How do you kind of combat this and have journalists have the final say, because a lot of them aren't educated in the ethics of journalism?
A couple of recent examples come to mind, actually, Tyler, and all we have as journalists are integrity, and we've got to get it right, and if we do that 100% of the time, we're going to earn the trust of the reader, the viewer, the listener. With social media, the accuracy can be in question. There was a social media account that went viral of a polar bear that was emaciated. And now there's some question about whether or not this was a climate change issue, or in fact it could be the polar bear could have health issues related to cancer. So people jumped to a conclusion in one place and we didn't know the context. Another one about a bullying incident in the United States, I think a young boy from Tennessee, and now there's some question around the background of that family, but people just accepted it without considering context or having the full context. And that's our job as journalists, is to provide that context. So we teach our students to assess the information, but more importantly, you have to double check and triple check the accuracy of that information, lest you get burned by a source. And these are examples on the social media sphere where people aren't necessarily being burned, but they don't have all the information, and as a result, people aren't getting the whole story. And it is our goal with our students to ensure that they're able to produce reports that are well-rounded and have that full context.
Yeah. Well, like any industry, journalism is always evolving. In what ways is it evolving now?
Oh boy, I wish I had the million-dollar answer to that question. It's evolving in the fact that social media is front and center. It is evolving in that, and this isn't a good evolution necessarily, in that there's an economic crunch around media organizations, so they have to find new ways to keep their model sustainable. And you know, the reports I've read around that is it could be another century before we even see how the sands of time sift and this all gets settled to the point where we're in a more stable environment. Because when you look at technology, there is a new technology available to the journalism industry on a regular, ongoing basis. Which ones survive and which ones die is up to the marketplace, but it is difficult for the media industry to present them because there's a cost associated with them. For example, there was augmented reality where QR codes were put on newspaper pages, and the Toronto Star thought that was a great idea, and it did not thrive.
Right. There's a big concern about video game journalists because a lot of people don't think that they can be accurate if they're getting free products in terms of free games or consoles. How can you kind of explain that industry and how someone could write without a bias even though they got products?
Well, the getting of the products is the interesting part. So each journalist has their own ethical compass that they might adhere to, and some organizations try to implement an ethical compass upon their employees. So, for example, where a video game journalist may get a free video game, at the Toronto Star, they may suggest to the journalist that they review the video game, have to use it obviously, but then return it to the company. Whether that's adhered to, I cannot sit here and tell you 100% accurately whether or not that happens at the Toronto Star. But the suggestion is that free gifts are not accepted at most major media organizations unless they have nominal value. The Toronto Star's guidelines suggest anything under $25 is okay to accept. Anything else should be returned, or it might be, in some instances, given to charity.
So do you believe there's a possibility that people that do get free products can write without bias?
That's a tough one. They can sit there and say, but it's not just the writing without bias, it's the appearance of some kind of bias. If the reader or viewer knows that that product has been given to the journalist free of charge and they get to keep it, why wouldn't they say something nice about that? And we use that in mainstream news, where if the mayor of the local town wants to buy you lunch as a journalist, are you being compromised? So it applies on all levels.
I'll be speaking with one of Mr. Legree's students later in the show. But first, let's take a break and come back with the editor-in-chief of one of Toronto's most popular gaming outlets. Stay tuned. We're back and you're watching Digital Circus. Today is all about ethics in gaming journalism. Who better to speak on the subject than veteran writer and editor-in-chief of comics and gaming magazine, Brendan Fry. So maybe you can just kind of describe the code of ethics at CGM.
Yeah, of course. That's a hard question because we have different ethics based on different things. For gaming, we ensure the player plays the game fully. They understand the medium and they actually understand why they're reviewing it. So we won't give a shooter to someone that only likes RPGs. We won't assign something to someone that has no idea why they're doing it. But beyond that, we also make sure if we're giving them a code, they do the review, or if they're buying the game, we list that too. So we make sure everything we do, we list on the site so everyone knows what we're doing, why we're doing it. And for tech, similarly, we make sure that if a company lends us a piece of tech or gives us a loaner device, we list that, and if the reviewer buys it themselves, they list that as well. So there's no ambiguity of what we as writers are doing and what the companies are doing but to give us the medium coverage.
Yeah, here at CGM, you have a lot of interns come in,
Yep.
I know that. How do you kind of pass along the ethics that you have been taught?
Yeah.
Is it kind of, it comes back to reminding them what they've learned in maybe journalism school, or is it really kind of your own teachings?
I think it's both. I mean, a lot of people we do take in have already gone to the journalism school. So some people have come to Durham College, they've gone to Seneca, Sheridan, Ryerson, U of T, but they always have the basic form of ethics you've given for any kind of journalism. But that being said, we also hammer into them our policies, so we have a very strong rubric that we follow. So nowhere in the rubric does it say you can kind of justify, oh, I got given this awesome thing and the guy's really cool, I'm going to give it a better score. Every score, every thing you put in a review has to be justified. We're not going to give a game that you say nothing good about a 9, and we're not going to give a game you say nothing bad about a 3. It has to be justified. It has to be justified within a rubric. The rubric is not to limit the reviewer, but what it is designed to do is give the reviewer the proper information to make a judgment.
So whether it be an intern, a young or veteran journalist, what's the procedure if someone makes a mistake in a story?
If there's mistakes made, they're obvious factual errors, we will print a retraction immediately, and we will take down the original story, along with giving an announcement that we've made this error. We want to make sure it's clear what actually happened. If it's a subjective error, that's a little bit more difficult. Like a reviewer might say, this is worse than X. It's hard for us to really judge that in the same way, because games are subjective mediums. Some people love a game, some people hate a game. Much like film, that's why Rotten Tomatoes exists. There's a diverse, wide series of opinions. But if there's a case where part of the office says, I disagree with what you're saying, we do sometimes do a counterpoint. So we'll have one reviewer do his thing, and then we'll have another writer just do an editorial that might counter that opinion, just so we show that there are two opinions to every sort of thing like that.
Is it a little more difficult when you've got the actual physical magazine? Because if something's sent to press, I mean, could you do a retraction maybe online?
Well, we rarely really try to make sure everything that goes in the print magazine has been checked by every editor. It does not go out until we've made sure that process does take place. Mm-hmm. So we've had one in the history of the magazine, which is now 7 years. We've had one instance where we had something that was a single sentence was just a little bit awkward, and it made the company say, hey, could you fix this? And what we did there was in the editorial section of the magazine, we had a retraction saying, this is what happened, here's what we were trying to say, and we are going to apologize for any errors that might have happened.
Right. And that's not particularly someone swaying you, that's just an error that you have corrected on your own.
We will never, as I've said, our ethics policy says, once we've assigned a score, we will never change that score. Mm-hmm. And that, from the point of that policy being written to now, we've never broken that. So once we've said, okay, this is the score we're giving this game, that's the score it has. I mean, we might have a updated mention, like editorial note, they've had a new day one patch, but the score is the score. It will never change. So if we give something a 70 and suddenly it becomes better with a patch, we're not going to suddenly change that to an 80. Conversely, if we give something a 90, and the company then says, oh, we've taken out all these features and put them all behind a paywall, we will make an editorial note that happened. We'll put a news story about it happening, but the score will stay the same.
Yeah. And YouTube's a totally different game, right?
Yes, very much so.
And the emergence of YouTube personalities and influencers have kind of muddied gaming journalism and coverage. Do you think that's an issue for people that have legitimate backgrounds and are gaming journalists?
Yes. YouTube it's the great leveler. Everyone has the same ability to kind of reach people. So you have people that are huge on YouTube that are really informative, really well thought out, and don't change their opinions based on what a company might give them.
Right.
There are also YouTubers, not naming anyone names, that don't do that and will change opinions based on, oh, I just got given this new game, oh, suddenly I love this game. And there are
money changes it too.
Of course. I mean, you might have they hated something until a sponsorship deal comes through, and then they suddenly love it. People that are looking at this stuff have to understand that they are not the same as a magazine. They're not the same as a journalistic outlet. So you can't view one as the same as the other.
Mm-hmm. So at the end of the day, do game journalists need to be good at games?
No. I mean, you're not paying someone to be good at games. You're paying someone for the knowledge base and understanding of how games are made and why they're made that way. I mean, you might have someone that loves first-person shooters, been playing first-person shooters for the last 30 years, and they may be okay. I mean, they might be fine, but you can't expect them to be the best of the best. They're not competitive gamers. You can't expect someone that reviews, let's say, 30, 40 games a year to be as good at every one of those games as someone that plays one game religiously 12 hours a day. It's not feasible. You do want your reviewers to be okay at games. You want them to understand the mechanics of games. You want them to be able to utilize higher end elements, because there's certain games that use complex aspects, more high end, like skills. You don't want someone to, let's Street Fighter, for example. You don't want a button masher reviewing Street Fighter. It wouldn't be fair to the people that are playing Street Fighter. It wouldn't be fair to people that are making Street Fighter. You want people that know how to use the mechanics of the game. Do you want them to be a pro athlete at Street Fighter? That might be a little bit much to ask, but you have to have that medium of know how to play the game, but be able to, but not expect them to, that's the only game they play.
After the break, I speak with an up-and-coming journalist from Durham College. See you then. Welcome back to Digital Circus. Joining me now is Dennis B. Price, first-year Durham College journalism student. Dennis, thank you so much for joining me. I know you're a big video game fan. I am too. This is kind of a match that works out.
Yeah, it works out great.
So today, this episode is all about ethics in journalism, and particularly video game journalism. So at what point did you realize you wanted to cover games for a living?
It's a good question. I think when it started all when I was a teenager. It's actually kind of a sad story because it happened after my grandma died, and I wanted to laugh at least. So I found this podcast called Game Scoop, and there was 2 hosts on it. That was Damon Hatfield and Greg Miller, and that led me on to like starting to listen to Podcast Beyond. And I've been listening to that ever since Greg left IGN, and I still listen to him even today.
Yeah.
So, and it just got me in the idea of writing about video games. That was like, that sounds like the greatest job ever.
Yeah.
Because I love video games. I've been playing since I was like 3 when I got an NES at a garage sale, or if it was a hand-me-down, it's hard to remember because I was 3. So yeah, and I've just been playing video games ever since.
Yeah. Yeah, those obviously from IGN podcasts, right?
Yep.
I honestly am a huge fan of what they do there.
Yeah.
And those podcasts specifically, Greg Miller is a genius in terms of just what he knows about the industry.
Yeah.
He's insane.
He
I
is.
think everybody kind of is not even secretly jealous, just openly jealous of who he is.
Yeah. But not jealous enough to hate him.
To hate him.
Because you love him.
Yeah.
He's a character.
Yeah.
And that's what makes him great. Like,
would you say that he is ethical in his reporting and in his discussions?
yeah, because like video game journalism, a lot of people are coming from different fields. You can be like a historian and be a video game journalist. That's happened actually for one in particular. And the thing is, Greg Miller is a journalism graduate from Mizzou, and he can be ethical because he's from that background.
So, what are your take on the idea that some journalists are bought? Because that's obviously a discussion that's happened, even pointed at IGN, and people like Greg Miller or Colin Moriarty, who are also, they're both former IGN employees. But
Yeah. It's a different slope, to be honest. Like, you can look at it from a journalistic perspective, but game journalism is its own beast.
Yeah.
Because journalism has been going on for centuries, maybe even millennium. And the coverage of video games, like, video games have been around since, the concept has been around since the late 40s. It's a direct effect from World War II. And like, it didn't come, the commercial entry didn't start till the 70s, and the coverage of that didn't, so it's a young industry. So the question of how we cover is up in the air right now.
One of the other big questions that a lot of people have being on the outside and not being game journalists is that a writer cannot be unbiased while reviewing a game that he's gotten for free. What is your take on that? Do you think that's true?
No, I don't, because we all have our biases. Like, there are some games that are reviewed by game journalists. Sometimes I think a game journalist should be a fan of that game to review it. Like, if you're a fighting game fan, you should review the fighting games. But sometimes that doesn't work out because every reviewer is assigned their own game by the website they work for, or even at places like Best Buy or even newspapers. So yeah, the biases it's a weird thing, but there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah. So you think that maybe it is possible for journalists to already have an idea in their mind if they like a game or not, just based on getting the game for free?
No, I think it's based on if they enjoy it or not.
Right.
Like, there are tons of games to review, and sometimes that game gets reviewed twice because they're like a definitive edition or whatever, and that score will be different because it's all dependent on the reviewer's mindset of the game, and not if they're getting money. Like, there's no evidence to say that publishers are like, take this money, give us a good score, and that's it. That doesn't happen.
Yeah.
At least I don't think it happens.
Most working journalists, especially in the game industry, when they are asked that question, they deny it. Now, obviously, who wouldn't? But you would think at this point, after all these years, that someone would come out and be a whistleblower.
Like if something happened like that, somebody would have said something sooner or later. Someone who got out of the industry would have, said the dirt that happened. Like EA wanted to get a good review of Battlefront 2 or something.
I think where it gets a little funny is with YouTubers, is because there's obviously controversy with that. People like PewDiePie and some others where they are paid to talk about a game and be positive, and a lot of time they don't disclose that.
Well, I wouldn't use YouTubers, but influencers.
Influencers, yeah,
Yes.
definitely, yeah.
They really don't have anything to say about that because they're getting paid. It's not a review, it's a sponsored ad at best. That's what some of those YouTubers are getting, or influencers on any internet sites.
Yeah, you've obviously heard the concerns of a lot of gamers, and then learning what you've learned at school in the program. How are you going to take those lessons and move forward in the industry?
Yeah, that's a good question. At some point, I do want to write for some site. That's the goal in my mind. Like, I'm hearing in classes about being a journalist. I don't want to be a journalist per se. I don't want to cover all this bad news because in my mind, video games is happy. It's good. And there's a lot of bad stuff that happens in that, but nothing that's life or death or whatever, politics-wise. And I just want to get in that industry whatever way.
And then obviously, be maybe someone like Greg Miller. I would a lot of the time think that he is one of the more ethical and responsible journalists or personalities out there.
Yeah, I would agree with that sentiment. Like, there's a lot I would trust with Greg and his opinions. Like, he's not a fan of all games, but I trust opinions on the games that I know he'll enjoy and that I know I will enjoy.
So Dennis, thank you so much for joining us. It's great talking with you, especially with someone that's coming up in the industry and really has this hungry eyes for video games.
Very hungry.
Yes, very hungry. I'm hungry too. Maybe I'll go get some wings after or something. But thank you for watching. This has been Digital Circus. Until next time, game on.